This is why in training all things work out first and they eventually stop working to a certain point. And it centers around the idea of multiple variables responsible for the expression of the outcome. And so you can think about this like in terms of point totals. Let's say there's 100 total points you can get. And we have 3 different variables that contribute to those points. We'll say max strength, we'll say late rate of force development, we'll keep it simple. This is a little simplified, and early stage. All right, makes sense so far, pretty straightforward. Of these, in the perfect world, max strength maybe explains 70, late stage maybe 20, and early stage maybe 10. That's if you just were working at optimal and you're getting everything out of it possible. But again, we're working with someone who's lifting weights for the first time. This is like the perfect genetic potential. So they could potentially get 70, but right now they only have 30. And they could potentially get 20, but right now they only have 5. Potentially they could get 10, and right now they only have 1. So the biggest area where you can see the most bang for your buck initially is that max strength. You improve it quite a bit. Let's say you get it to 60. Now you've taken your score, which is 36, and you've taken it all the way to 66. That's a huge improvement. But even if you increase it only 10 more points, you only get to 76, and you're still short of that 100 score. So at first, max strength is going to get you a lot of progress, but eventually it tapers off. It's kind of a little bit too straightforward in this example. It's not totally how it works, because when you train something like max strength, you actually might train a little bit of early stage rate of force development and late stage rate of force development. You can call this like radiation. So like if I'm training max strength right here, it radiates a little bit into other qualities, and that might be like early RFD and late stage RFD. And it radiates, and the radiation goes opposite as well. So maybe if you train late stage RFD, you have some radiation this way. And so there's a highly cross-variable aspect. This aspect up here is just really easy to explain, but in reality we have some radiation or transmission of variables across different domains. So what's really important here is the influence of these variables also changes per exercise that you're doing. So in this example, if the total perfect performance is 100 and we say the max potential of this is 70, that means max strength has an explained variance of 70% on this performance. Meaning if these two were just completely 0, but my max strength was 70, of the 100 total points I could get, I got 70 points, so 70%. Makes sense, right? But depending on the exercise, we're still going to have 100 points, but the weight of max strength late stage and early stage might change. Maybe if we're sprinting, max strength drops a lot, and it's only going to explain 40%. And late stage maybe explains, let's say, 40, and early stage, well, if I'm good at math, is 20%. So now the variables themselves change depending on the movement. So you have two kind of fluctuating aspects. What movement are we doing? And then what's the variables at play? And the key aspect of this is the fact there are multiple variables being expressed in a given situation. And that explains why if you do max strength training, or you do early rate of force development stuff, or whatever you want to explain and break the variables down to, you're going to have some increase in performance. And so at the end of the day, this makes stuff really confusing. Because what happens, you could have 2 athletes, in theory, 2 athletes, call them A's, athlete 1 and athlete 2. And we're going to do a movement that requires, we'll say max strength, or easy math, is 60 potential. We'll say late is 20 and early is 20. And we're trying to see how many points they can get. This first athlete does a great job here. He has 40 out of max strength, but he only has 5 on late stage and 5 on early stage. So he's a total of 50. This athlete over here doesn't do very well in max strength. He only has 20, but he has 10. We'll give him actually 15 on late stage and 5 over here. Well, that's bad math again. We'll give him 10 over here. Wow, I can't do math. 15 and 15. My goodness. Point is, they both have 50 points. If I could do math, that would have been a lot easier. So they are both performing at the same output, but through different mechanisms. This person's expressing it quite heavily through max strength dominance, and this one has these other factors of early and late stage. Now, how we define these aspects is very, very tough, but you can think about how these exist because we've done studies, and you can do your own studies with your athletes if you want, or read studies, I don't care what you do. You can basically plot a load velocity, we'll call this velo, we'll call this load profile, and we have the highest loads at the slowest velocities. It looks something like this, highest load. But if we plot a whole bunch of athletes, we see something that begins to look like this, maybe. And what happens is the correlation to max strength is really tight through here. Maybe it's like 80, but when it gets down here, it falls off to about 15. This is just making numbers up. This is the R value. And so what's happening is telling you, well, something else is explaining what's going on here. And there is some research to back it up based on some neuroscience and the measurements of electrical activity, that this aspect might be broken down in two areas, which is early stage, which is how quickly you can transmit neurological impulses. I spelled that wrong, but you get the idea. And in the middle is late stage, which has to do maybe with the fiber typing. And up here, max strength might have to do with something, again, with more contractility, I should say, under heavy load. But again, it's explained by multiple variables because things get really muddy when you start to add all this stuff in. So that's why simple Twitter debates don't really suffice to try and get this point across. You need to understand there are multiple variables, and depending on the movement you're looking at, the expression of those variables differ. And two people can, in theory, have the same exact movement output and total performance despite having very different movement or variable expression, strength, quality expression profiles. So I hope that makes sense and why this is really complicated at times and it's not as straightforward. And why when you do something like lifting heavy weights or you sprint or whatever, it seems to always improve performance to a point because they all are contributing to performance to a point. And what works for one person might not work for another because the expression relative to what the other variables are being expressed might be different. And eventually you keep training one and training one, like this person over here who has the 40, eventually gets to 60, you can keep training it, but they can't get above 60. So the rate of return looks something like this. And every single quality has their own rate of return curve, or whatever it might look like, relative to their current state and abilities. But it's more detailed than that even because you haven't brought in many other variables, and that's why the human body is complex and there isn't one perfect training system that we figured out yet because everybody is very different and it's really confusing and it kind of stinks at times because it makes stuff really tough. But at least doing stuff like this, we can begin to hopefully better understand at least what we're trying to look at and how we can discuss it. So I hope that makes sense. I hope you guys enjoy, and always thanks.